Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share the show with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today has penned more than 50 plays and has more than 100 productions of his works performed around the world. His play, The 20th-Century Way, premiered at the Theatre at Boston Court and the New York International Fringe Festival, garnering 5 Ovation Award nominations, 4 Los Angeles Drama Critics Circle nominations, 1 GLAAD Award nomination, a Fringe Festival Award for Outstanding Production of a Play, and a Penn Center Award for Drama. It then moved off Broadway to Rattlestick Playwrights Theatre. He's been a co-literary manager of the Theatre at Boston Court, a founding member of Playwrights Ink, and a board member of Cornerstone Theatre Company and the Theatre at Boston Court. His most recent play, The Bauhaus Project, has previews starting July 12th at the Atwater Village Theatre and will be running simultaneously with his play Crevasse beginning July 26th at the Victory Theatre here in the Los Angeles area. Both pieces focus on the relationship of art and artists to the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany, and both close on August 18th at the respective theater. Please welcome Tom Jacobson. Thank you for coming on.
Happy to be here.
So now I have to, because I had it under the understanding that you open tomorrow, but you're doing previews of the Bauhaus Project tomorrow. Now, does Crevasse not open on July 26th, or is that previews as well? I just want to make sure that we correct anything I might have said.
They're two separate productions. So one of them previews this week and opens next week, and Crevasse opens the following week.
Got it. Okay. And we will give a link down below for when this episode drops to where those listening and might be in the area can go catch it before either one closes. I apologize, I'm going to put you on the spot, but before we started this, you said, thank God for previews.
Bauhaus Project is a trilogy of plays. We're presenting it in 2 parts, 1 play on one night and 2 plays on the second night. So it's enormous. It's 3 whole plays with 5 actors doing everything. So it's a heavy, heavy lift, and we need every minute that we have. And previews are an important part of the process.
And that's what we've been learning.
And we learn a lot from what happens in previews. So I'm excited about tomorrow night and the whole weekend when we'll be seeing how the play works in front of an audience.
Now, does Crevasse kind of coincide as well? Or is it a total separate story? Does it have any intersection to the Bauhaus Project?
They both take place one takes place in the 1920s into the 1930s, and they both take place in Germany between World War I and World War II. Okay. So the Bauhaus Project mostly takes place from 1919 to 1933, and Crevasse takes place entirely in 1938. Okay. And there's a little bit in Los Angeles in both of them, but mostly Germany.
How, you said there's 2 parts, it's in 3 parts, and part 1 is part 2, or simultaneously, and part 3 happens. Was that the intention the whole entire time, or what was the catalyst? How did this come about, and what was the writing process to make everything coincide?
So I was challenged a few years ago. My husband said, you write trilogies, because I'd had a trilogy of plays called The Ballad of Bimini Baz. It was done by 3 separate theaters simultaneously a few years ago. And he said, you need to write a trilogy about the Bauhaus. Bauhaus in Weimar, the Bauhaus in Dessau, and the Bauhaus in Berlin. And I said, no one would want to see that but you. But then I started researching it, and I realized it was a really great format for that kind of almost novelistic play, because it's 3 parts and you get a lot of time to tell a very complicated, long story. Sure.
Okay. Now, for those of us, or those of our listeners that may not know what the Bauhaus is, can you explain that to them?
The Bauhaus was a school of art and architecture that opened in 1919, sort of coming out of the ashes of World War I in Germany, and it was intended to bring art and design to the people. So sort of melding craft with art and making something that was beautiful but affordable for the average person.
Okay. Now, let's go back to the comment about writing trilogies. Do those trilogies always run simultaneously, or is like, hey, here's one, and then like a year later, here comes a sequel, and then maybe a year or 2 after, here comes the third?
You could do that to space them out. one of the inspirations for doing the play now is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Bauhaus was in 2019. The Bauhaus moved to its second location in Dessau in 1925. So next year will be the 100th anniversary of that historic move. And then the Bauhaus moved to Berlin in 1932. So in Germany right now, there's a celebration of all of these different locations of the Bauhaus, and it moves from Weimar to Dessau to Berlin in that celebration. So this whole next several years, the Bauhaus will be uppermost in people's minds in Germany.
Sure. But going back to your, how many trilogies have you indeed written?
So I've written one that hasn't been produced. That one's about Pompeii, but the Ballad of Bimini Baz was produced in 2018 by...
And that was a trilogy as well?
Yeah, it was a trilogy. So Rogue Machine did one, Son of Semele did one, and Playwrights Arena did one. And they coordinated. They're very separate plays, but they all tell part of the same story, and they presented them simultaneously. And of course, you could buy a ticket that would get you into all three for a discount.
Sure. Okay. No, and that's phenomenal. And that's why I asked, because I think there was somebody else who had written a trilogy or a couple of sequels or something like that, which would be a trilogy, I suppose. But to space them out, I'm like, it's not like a movie where you see the first and then you can go back and revisit it before you watch. And that's why I'm kind of curious. So what's the process of writing something that for the stage that's meant to be seen simultaneously?
Well, you want to have a cliffhanger, but one that's satisfying enough that, you feel like you've seen a phase of a story, but want to come back and hear the next part. And the frame for this particular play is modern. It's 5 art students in a Southern California art school today who don't want to do a presentation on the Bauhaus. One of them says, I don't want to do a play about white people 100 years ago, but they have to do it. And so they do it, and in the process, they're creating their presentation. That's a lot of the first play as we see their process, and then they begin their presentation in the first play. And then there's a cliffhanger not only for the people who lived and worked in the Bauhaus in 1925, but also the students. So I've got 2 stories going simultaneously. The students are also in crisis, as the Bauhaus was in crisis and moving from location to location. So I always want there to be a cliffhanger, like you have always, if you have a 2-act play, at the end of the first act, you have a cliffhanger of some kind. In this kind of play, it's at the very end of the first play and at the very end of the second play. There's a bit of a cliffhanger. You want to know what finally happened.
Now, for the end of that first play and you're having that cliffhanger, hypothetically, if you don't go and see the second part, the second play, is it still a standalone piece?
It really does need to be along with the other 2 pieces. I mean, yeah, sure, you've learned about the Bauhaus in Weimar, but you don't know the full history of the Bauhaus. And I like to think it's intriguing enough, and there are enough things that would draw you into, oh my gosh, what happened next in Dessau and then in Berlin.
Okay.
And we do hint at that, because we do say, as the students are preparing their presentation, originally they were only going to do Weimar, but then they have an incident during their presentation that forces them to do Dessau and ultimately Berlin. And they say, as they're preparing their presentation, well, the Nazis shut them down in 1933. So you hint about Nazis and conflict, and that, of course, doesn't happen until the third play.
Got it. Okay. It's fascinating. So in parts 1 and part 2, do you see those at the same theater that night, and then you go to part 3 another night, or it's part 1, which is, there are 2 acts to it. One is the preparation for the presentation, and then the second act is the presentation on Weimar. Okay.
And that's one night. And then the second night, we've compressed the 2 plays into one evening. So the first half of the evening, the first act is Dessau, and the second act is Berlin.
Does that make it a 4-act play?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, If you saw the whole thing, yes. If you saw it all at once, I suppose it could be a 4-act play. But it's really 3 separate plays, because the second and third plays are just 1 act. They're 1 long act.
And that's what I'm trying to imagine this structurally. And of course, when I see them, I'll probably have a better understanding. But just hearing about it, what's the process of that, and what's the preparation? What's the outlining? How do you keep track of all this?
It was really fun to research. And, when I initially said to my husband, why would anyone want to see this? I didn't know why they would want to see it unless they had a very strong art and design background. But then I began to research it, which anytime you do a historic piece, you have to do. That's one of the joys of a historic piece, is you can find out all kinds of things that are drama. So, for instance, the Bauhaus existed from the end of World War I until Hitler became chancellor. And that means that the rise of the Nazis took place during the entire existence of the Bauhaus. And that manifested a little bit in Weimar, a lot more in Dessau, and ultimately, closed the Bauhaus in Berlin. So threading in how the Nazi influence affected the Bauhaus, and of course, there are echoes universally throughout Germany and then also today, that was really exciting to me. So there were anti-Semites affiliated with the Bauhaus. The famous artist Vasily Kandinsky would never describe himself as an anti-Semite, because his best artistic friend was Arnold Schoenberg, who was an Austrian Jew. But one of the fun and kind of scary things in the play is, and this is true, Alma Mahler, who was married to the founder of the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius, hit on Arnold Schoenberg, and in fact had an affair with him, and tried to do the same with Vasily Kandinsky. He turned her down, so she decided to kind of mess with him. And she told Arnold Schoenberg, be careful of Kandinsky, he's an anti-Semite. And she knew an anti-Semite, knew from anti-Semitism, because she was herself an anti-Semite, married to 2 different Jewish men over time. It was very complicated. Yeah. So to tell the story of this very challenging woman breaking up this very powerful friendship on the basis of anti-Semitism, and it's very clear what happened, because there are a series of letters between Kandinsky and Schoenberg that detail it. And so those letters in very truncated form are in the play, and it's heartbreaking.
I would imagine. So how do you not split the difference? It's find balance between what you want. I mean, all of it's historic, but where's the balance between historic events and the relationships of the people that you're covering? Because you've got to have both. And is there a balance? Do you focus more on one than the other?
Well, the students themselves have this discussion in the first part of the play. They say, well, we can't just report what happened. That would be boring. We have to understand why these people had conflict with each other. There has to be conflict. The first play, they experiment with a number of different things, and they have conflict themselves, which makes it a lot of fun. But they discovered that there was great conflict between the founder of the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius, and his master teacher, Johannes Itten. There was a power struggle there. And ultimately Gropius won, but Itten was very powerful. And he was a very strange guy who practiced a religion called Mazdaznan, which was headquartered here in Los Angeles. So there's a Los Angeles thread that comes throughout the play to sort of bring it home for a Los Angeles audience, or at least an American audience. And they say to themselves as they're putting it together, we need to focus on these relationships and this conflict. And that was a really great conflict. Of course, Alma Mahler got involved in that one too, but they ultimately cut Alma Mahler out of the whole thing because they say she's peripheral. And the other character, one of them who plays Alma Mahler, argues on behalf of Alma that she's monstrous, but monstrously entertaining. And so we should keep her. and they disagree, and they don't keep her. But keeping the focus on conflict between humans that we actually see on stage, as opposed to, the what's going on with Hitler in somewhere else that we don't always see. That conflict focus is really what makes it drama.
Right. Okay. Then, so when you're researching, I'm like, where do you start? And then do you know? Are you learning what you're going to use, or do you kind of find these discoveries, and then once you figure out what you're going to do, when do you know when to stop researching and start writing, or are you continually researching?
You're right. It is endless. I mean, I have a stack of books about 3 feet high on the Bauhaus, and have done lots of internet research as well. So there's a lot you can read about it and learn about it, and you can't put it all into a play because that would be ridiculous. But my entry into the whole thing was Johannes Itten, because his religion was so strange. And the woman that built my house here in Los Angeles, which she built as a factory in 1951, was a German woman who would practice Mazdaznan. Wow. And so I had a personal connection to that. And so she's a character in the play too. And so those were kind of my entry points. But I also wanted to honor the real historical things. Walter Gropius as a founder, but he was married to this phenomenally interesting woman, Alma Mahler, who was first married to Gustav Mahler and then Walter Gropius, and then ditched him for the writer Franz Werfel, who had to flee Germany or had to flee Austria with her after the Anschluss in 1938, and they came to Los Angeles, and he was a novelist and a screenwriter, and he wrote. He was a Jewish man who had to flee Austria, and he wrote the most Catholic movie ever, Song of Bernadette, that Jennifer Jones won an Oscar for. So I thought, okay, Alma Mahler's amazing, but I connected her initially because of Walter Gropius. But then I started researching all the other people, and there were members of the staff and especially students at the Bauhaus who became Nazi Party members, and one of them actually designed portions of Auschwitz later. Wow. And then, of course, some of the Jewish students in the Bauhaus died at Auschwitz. So here's someone who studied how to do effective architectural design and employed it to kill people, and ended up killing his fellow students.
Obviously you're jumping back and forth in time. Now, is it just Germany in the past and then Los Angeles in the past and future, or do you visit Germany in both present and past as well?
So Germany not in the present at all. Germany's always historic. Los Angeles, we're always in the present. Okay. There's kind of an epilogue that we'll present later that takes place in Los Angeles in 1951 when my building was built. But the students are always in the present.
Got it. Okay. And then say the name of the religion again.
Mazdaznan. And
can you kind of give us a basis of what this...
Mazdaznan is a variation on the ancient Zoroastrian religion, which is sometimes called the first monotheistic religion. But this version of it was premised on the superiority of the Aryan race. And so it was a good fit for Germany at the time. Uncomfortable for us today,
sure.
But there are still people that practice this religion. And Johannes Itten, the main practitioner at the Bauhaus, converted a lot of students to this religion. They wore these robes all the time, and they ate special food that was supposed to make them healthy, but it really just gave them gas and bad breath. And he was kind of a guru. And he designed what he called the House of the White Man for this perfect Aryan man.
Was this a young religion at the time, or was it?
It was young. It was invented in, I think, the teens by an American who took it to Germany and then brought it back here to Los Angeles.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. It's really cool and strange.
And it sounds like an exact conflict, for lack of a better word, with Judaism.
Or with anyone that
Sure.
doesn't believe that the Aryan race is superior.
Well, sure, yeah.
So most people.
Wow. And then, so how much does that come into play? And again, like I said, where's this? How do you balance it? And
Well, in that first play, it's really important because we see the effect that Itten has on the students, because he taught the introductory courses, and he used that to inculcate them in their religion as well as what he was teaching them in the school. And he was a good-looking guy, and like I said, a guru. So the students kind of flocked to him, and he could control a lot of them. And he was going to use that to try to take over the school because he had all these students that would sort of be on his side as he challenged Itten for the top job.
Is that a metaphor for taking over all the school
Well, there's a lot. It's funny because I'm doing a webinar next week on the history of the Bauhaus, and it's called Education as a Radical Political Act. And of course, the presentation ties to a lot of the things that are happening in schools today with the Ten Commandments and the Bible being taught, as well as slavery being taught as something that gave slaves useful skills in Florida, which is required there. So a lot of the things that I don't write German plays for Germans. I write German plays for Americans because a lot of the things that were happening in Germany between the wars are things that are happening now. And I didn't write these plays yesterday, but since I wrote them a few years ago, a lot more has come true, and the parallels are even closer.
You've got your notes. Well, first of all, how much creative license did you take, or did you just remain true to?
I had to make up some stuff, but not a whole lot. I mean, I sort of fudged Maria Kipp's relationship to the Bauhaus. She was never a student there. She studied at the Kunstgewerbeschule in Munich with the woman who ultimately ran the weaving studio at the Bauhaus. So I think they were friends. I don't have proof of that.
Sure.
But in the play, we see that they are friends. And she comes to visit, and she's intrigued, and she tries to get in. And so this is where I'm really playing with the truth. She becomes a pawn in the conflict between Walter Gropius and Johannes Itten for admission to the Bauhaus. And she gets admitted by Itten, and Gropius denies her admittance. So she has this chip on her shoulder, and that comes into play in 1951. There's a long thread for a lot of these.
An intricate thread, I can imagine. So you've done your research. Now, as you're going, have you started writing the play at all? Or are you still kind of, I'm not going to start until I've got copious notes, I've got an outline, and then I'll start? Or are you
I'm a
writing as you go?
very lazy playwright. In other words, I try to find the most efficient way to do it, and that is to use an outline. And I love outlines. Outlines are amazing. It's so much easier to change an outline than it is to change a play.
Sure.
So I outline like crazy. So for each play in this trilogy, I probably did 30 pages of outline and then wrote a 100-page play. So that outlining process allows me to set the structure. So when I'm actually writing dialogue, I'm only writing dialogue. I'm not worried about structure because it's already there in the outline.
So in that statement, I'm going to go back to something you just said. So where does the lazy playwright come into play right there? Because there's that sounds like there's nothing lazy going on.
Well, planning is a sort of symptom of laziness. It's like, well, if I plan this, I'll have less work later. And so planning means that you don't have to go back and rewrite the whole damn play because there's some structural problem that you didn't realize because you didn't outline. If you outline, you're saving yourself a lot of trouble down the road.
Sure, absolutely. And I wouldn't call that, I definitely call that far from lazy. I think lazy is not taking the time to outline it to save you the time later, to be honest. So you said you love outlining. So what's that process like as you gather things, and then what are the absolute things that you love about it?
Well, the structure becomes very apparent, and there are basic things about playwriting structure that you're going to have. You have to have an opening that grabs people's attention. You have to have a cliffhanger at the end of Act 1. You have to have something really good to launch you into Act 2, and then you have to have a climax that the whole play builds to. And so you need to know fairly early how is this going to end, so you can work backward so that everything points to that climactic moment in the play. In the Bauhaus trilogy, it's pretty easy. The story of Bauhaus and Weimar ends with the closure of the Bauhaus, which is a very dramatic and powerful moment because it was heartbreaking to so many of the people there. Same thing happened in Dessau. It builds with a different kind of conflict, and the governmental interference becomes much more apparent at Dessau. But it ends with the closure of Dessau by the government that oversaw the Bauhaus in Dessau, which was the first municipal government to go Nazi in 1932. So when all these Nazis were elected in 1932, they said, well, we hate modernism, and we're going to close the Bauhaus, we're kicking you out, and we're going to tear down the buildings and burn them to the ground because they hated the idea of modernism so much. That didn't happen. They didn't burn it to the ground, but they cut off their funding, and the Bauhaus then stopped getting government funding because they were by then pretty famous and making a lot of money on the products that they were creating. And so they could afford to move into Berlin and be private. But that only lasted 6 months because then Hitler became chancellor in January of 1933, and the Bauhaus was shut down in April of that year.
Going back to structure, you touch base on a couple different, obviously, capturing your audience and getting to it. We could call it inciting incident, maybe. Can we break down each of those items just for playwrights that maybe coming across this, that might be just be on their way, starting out, where who knows, you might have an approach to where certain things like, oh, I've never thought of it that way, that even playwrights that are established might garner some.
So for this play, I'll just use the examples within the Bauhaus. In the opening scene, you immediately see what the problem is. There's one student who is very enthusiastic about doing this, but it's kind of like the Breakfast Club. They're all kind of on probation. And the opening scene, the lights come up, and he's giving the Bauhaus manifesto. He's passionately, telling them this great manifesto for this art school. And they're all students in an art school, so they should care. But they're totally ignoring him, and they're all on their phones.
Of course.
And that is and you see in an instant what the conflict is going to be between him and everyone else. And what we realize is, okay, what he has to do is get them all to work together. And they're all students that are in trouble for either not being collaborative or running out of money. There are all kinds of different reasons that they're in trouble at the school. One has an ethics violation, and he's got to, with their help, pull them all together. And then they learn over the course of all three plays about collaboration and across disciplines, because they're all from different disciplines. One is a musician, one is an architect, one is an actor, one is a sculptor, and one is a graphic designer. And they're all like, why should I care about this? And why should I care about you? And they all end up caring about each other, which was kind of how the Bauhaus worked, because so many of the masters at the Bauhaus were multidisciplinary. So Oskar Schlemmer, who is famous for his painting of the Bauhaus staircase, the Bauhaus Treppe, he was also a choreographer and a dancer himself. So he also did theater. He was an amazing artist in a variety of disciplines. Wassily Kandinsky played the cello. They were such geniuses. They could do all kinds of things, and they would do a lot of cross-disciplinary stuff in their work, but also in their play. So the Bauhaus was famous for parties. They had parties all the time. They had costume parties. They would dress up in these crazy costumes that were very, very clever. And there was a Bauhaus band and a Bauhaus song, and they kind of lived this collaboration every day.
Wow. Okay. And then so moving on, we've captured our audience. What's our next step?
Well, we've established what the problem is and what the goal is, and it's like we have to do this presentation, and we find out why each of the students has to do the presentation. They'll all get kicked out of school, and if this one gets kicked out of school, her family practically mortgaged the house to get her into the school, and she'll disappoint her whole family who she loves. The one student is just passionately focused on the Bauhaus. Another one is dying to get into grad school. Another one, if she doesn't, this is her 5th school where she studied acting, and if she doesn't do well, her dad has said, I'm cutting you off. That's it. You've been kicked out of everywhere. You'll be done. And then one of them has an immigration problem, and if he loses his student status, he has to go back to China. And he's done some posts on social media that will get him in big trouble in China, so he should not go back.
Now, obviously, there's a time difference between what's going on in the past and what's going on in the future. Is there a correlation with the characters in the past that have similar, or is it completely different where, this person can represent this person?
Well, they all represent multiple people, and part of the point of who they represent is that they're representing people very different from themselves, because we've cast it the way students in an art school today would look. So there's one white actor, there's one black actor, there's one Korean actor, one Hawaiian actor who is multiracial, and one Latina. And so when one of them, and it's the black student who says that, why would I want to do a story about a bunch of white people 100 years ago, they end up playing, because of course all the Bauhaus figures were all the whitest people in the world. They were, one of them says, well, they weren't all German. It's, it's Swiss and Austrian and Russian, like super, super white. But for instance, Itten, who practiced Mazdaznan, this racist religion premised on the superiority of the Aryan race, is played by the black student. So this black student is saying, I'm building the house for this perfect man, the white man. And it's awesome because of those layers of today bleeding through the 1930s. So there are really interesting parallels. The play is written without gender or ethnicity specified for the students. So however you can cast it is how you could do it. I mean, you could do it with a bunch of white actors, but they wouldn't be very, at least not as interesting as our production is. Yeah. But those layers of today and then really work well because there's often this contrast between what the student is today. And, one of the joys of casting young actors in a play about young people is they bring who they are to the table. So we asked them, for instance, the other day we said, you know what, we don't have last names for these actors or for the students. And of course that's by design, because I didn't want to peg an ethnicity by a last name. Yeah. But we gave all the actors the task of picking the last name for their character based on who they thought they were and who they wanted that character to be. So that was a very fun exercise about, this character, because she's multiracial, her name will be hyphenated Japanese and Jewish. It was fun for the actors to do that.
Quick question, and then I want to go into the next part. So basically, your modern day actors are playing the actors or the characters in the past as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah. They play all the characters in the past.
So let's go into that aspect where we're talking about the table work. How much table work is there before you guys get into this?
There was a lot, and we'd done a lot of development prior. Open Fist and I had a series of readings with company members over the last several years, including even before the pandemic, but during the pandemic. So the script got kind of honed in that way. But then once we got the actors in the room, of course, we did a lot of table work because they had a lot of history to learn, and their own input was really important too. So one of the characters, there was a word that she didn't tell me. She told the director she was uncomfortable saying this word, and that word I agreed with her was not generationally appropriate.
Sure.
It was a word that someone older than this student would have used. So we changed the word. And so the input of the actors is always really important to the process. I listen a lot to actors because they're focused on their characters. I'm focused globally on the whole play, but they're going to know their characters really well. And especially in a play where what the actor brings to the table as themselves is part of the character that they're playing more than usual in a play. Their input is really valuable.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the role of the playwright when it comes to table work. How much involvement do you have, or how much do you just kind of hold back and then chime in when it's appropriate?
Well, I always want to honor the director's role in this, and some directors are more comfortable with the playwright hanging back and writing notes and communicating only to the director, because actors can be confused by voices coming at them from more than one direction. But Martha's super collaborative, and she wanted me to speak up in the room. And there's so much that, because this is a historic play, that needs some explanation. You know, what is a Kunstgewerbeschule? And they say it in the play, but what does that actually mean? And there are all kinds of, like when they talk about, when they use the word Gesamtkunstwerk, and it's sort of mentioned in the play, but I went into great depth about how that was used to apply to, especially to Wagner. And all that provides some depth for the actors. They can't absorb all of it, but they absorb a lot of it, and that helps them build their characters. But also then they get to ask me the questions that, like, why is it like that? You know, why does a character say that? Who are they talking about? I don't get it. And then we get to have a conversation. So I love table work. It's really fun.
When it comes to pronunciation of foreign words, for lack of a better word or phrase, what kind of research did you do, unless you already were versed in these languages, where you knew that pronunciation?
I've been talking about the Bauhaus with my husband probably the last 30 years. So a lot of the people there, I know the names and how to pronounce them. And then it just happens that one of our dear friends who's visiting, she arrived yesterday from Germany. She taught until she recently retired at Bauhaus University. So Bauhaus was revived after 1990, and she taught there, and she just stepped down from that role. And so she's an American, but she's been living there a long time, so her German's awesome. Right. And so she's helped me with other plays as well. So that's part of that pronunciation. But we're also blessed with our director, Martha Dempson, is also a German speaker. Okay. So she has helped it gives me confidence that we're getting the pronunciation right. And, interestingly, the students don't always have to get it right, because the student characters aren't German. They're portraying Germans. And so, if they can't say Bolshevik or Gesamtkunstwerk or Nietzsche, their stumbles and their struggles are part of the play. And them being students allows for that.
Got it. Now I'm putting it together. This is a portrayal of modern day actors playing the historical characters, not a juxtaposition of the past as it happened, but them performing what happened, or their interpretation of what happened.
Right. There are
kind of a play within a play.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There are modern actors portraying modern students who then also portray the historic characters.
Got it. Okay. I thought we were jumping back and forth to the past of like
a different set of actors.
Yes, but played by the same actors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's the same. It's the same actors, because the student personalities bleed through, and you also see that because the students wrote the play. Right. It's their presentation. There are speech quirks from each of the students that make their way into the characters that they're portraying in the past. So there's a phrase that one of them uses a lot, which is a phrase I always find very amusing. He says, it's no disrespect intended. And of course, you only say that or no, with all due respect is the phrase. With all due respect, when someone says that, they're announcing, I'm about to really disrespect you. So this character says that a lot, and then that shows up because that character doesn't write these scenes,
right,
but other characters write the scenes, and they have the characters that are played by that actor say those words. So you see the personalities of the students bleed through into the personalities of the historic characters.
It sounds like there can be a lot of fun in this process.
It's super fun, yeah.
So this is a standalone piece. So where does Crevasse come into play, and what was the mindset of having this coincide with the Bauhaus Project?
So I'll give you the origin of Crevasse and then why they're happening simultaneously, because that's interesting too. But I had this memory that I think is a false memory. I now hope it's a false memory, that there had been a play in Los Angeles 30 years ago or more about Leni Riefenstahl coming to Los Angeles in 1938 and meeting with Walt Disney. Because I thought that's a great idea for a play, and I never saw it. So I thought I would love to see that. I researched it. There have been plays. There's a radio play. There was a play in the Bay Area, sort of about that, but not focused on Disney in the way that I wanted to. And of course, it's perfect for a two-hander. And so I researched it and found out so much. I mean, in that one, I've had to make up almost nothing. We know the outcome of their meeting. We know when she came. We know sort of what he showed her, but we don't really know that conversation. And then I framed the conversation. It's just two actors, but they play a total of 6 roles. Each of them play 2 other parts. So that is a really fun structure that really shows off these 2 amazing actors that are doing this play. Ann Noble and Leo Marks. They're incredible. And so I wrote both of these plays because I was kind of steeped in the interwar period in Germany. And I wrote them both before. I think I wrote Crevasse maybe at the beginning of the pandemic. But then my manager said, these are really touchy subjects and they need some context so that people really understand what the intention is. And because there's some rough stuff in there. There's some really ugly anti-Semitism in the plays, because in order to examine it, you have to depict it. And she said, why don't we put this in the context of a larger program that digs into some of these themes? So we found some other collaborators, and we had a salon in a private home on July 1st. Under the rubric, all of these now, the 2 plays and these other programs are under the rubric of a program called Reflections on Art and Democracy. And the first one was 67-year-old Alma Mahler hosting a salon in a private home in 1947 to talk about the influence of German music on American culture from her point of view, which it was delightful. It was really, really fun. One of the guests said to me afterwards, well, she was a monster, that you've made her too nice here. And I said, oh, come see the play, because that shows the other side of Alma Mahler. So we did that. And then next week, we're doing the webinar on education as a radical political act at Art Center College of Design. One of the reasons for that is we want the design community, specifically Art Center, to know about the plays, because they're a really great audience for that. So we're doing that next week. And then we may have another webinar on Maria Kipp, the textile designer that built my house. Her work is in the collection, the permanent collection at LACMA, and a curator from LACMA is now studying her and wants to do a webinar on Maria Kipp. And then Theater Dybbuk, which is a Jewish theater that does really amazing in-depth examinations of esoteric topics related to Judaism. They are presenting an illuminated lecture at the Skirball Center on September 1st. And that will deal with department stores in Germany and what happened in the teens, 20s, and 30s and into the 40s. So that's going to be a fascinating thing that relates to the themes of the play as well. So all of these things together are reflections on art and democracy.
we're going to pause right there for 1 second. We'll get back to that in a second. My camera just totally went out, which I've never had happen. I just looked.
I'm glad you have Edgar Allan Poe sticky notes.
Yeah, my girlfriend got that.
I have an Edgar Allan Poe play too that hasn't been produced yet. I think next year. We're working on it.
So I want to go back to two things that you mentioned in that story. Is that I understand the question of intention, but why not let the piece stand alone on its own without having to make additional commentary behind it?
I think that the situation is so urgent. I think the plays do stand on their own. I always resist doing author's notes because I think, I wrote the damn play. That's what I wanted to say. But in this case, there's such a rich tapestry of what goes around these two things. The Bauhaus is one big thing, but it's only a small part of what happened in Germany, obviously. And Leni Riefenstahl's role was very significant in the rise of the Nazis. But putting that in the larger context of what does it mean with department stores and what does it mean with a local person like Maria Kipp, providing that extra makes it a bigger thing at a time when we're facing really similar issues here. It's also a different way of promoting the two plays.
100%.
By tapping into the design audience at Art Center, by tapping into the Skirball audience. Okay. If those two much larger entities are promoting the programs that they're doing, then these small theaters might get some new audience that they wouldn't otherwise get.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that I can definitely stand behind. Now I want to go back to the other aspect of this particular piece with Crevasse, and that is why. Tell me the mindset behind having, besides showing off talent or rather not showing off, but really displaying talent of two different people or two actors. Why not cast 6?
Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. 6 is way more expensive than 2.
Fair enough.
And I'm glad you mentioned showing off the talents of the actors. Sure. But here's the main reason. I always like when I do doubling in a play for there to be a reason. There's a reason for all the doubling in Bauhaus. The students are playing people unlike themselves to develop empathy for those people that are unlike them, which to me is always a huge metaphor in acting. Sure. Acting is about empathy for someone who's not you. In this play, because what Leni Riefenstahl did empowered the Nazis, and there are people that are obviously that really dislike her, and a lot of people, most people, and there are people that also dislike Disney, and there are people that love Disney, but there are people that dislike him as well. And so one of the things that's really important in this play, the frame for the play, is the first two people we see are neither Disney nor Leni Riefenstahl. And this is true, and this is what's so amazing about this story. Leni Riefenstahl's publicist was not allowed to work in Germany because his wife was Jewish. His wife divorced him so he could work. And so he could come with Leni, and he had the contacts here in Hollywood to set up the appointments that she had. And so we see that couple at the beginning, and they're two people with a terrible problem. He can't work. His wife suggests the divorce, and he doesn't want a divorce, but they did it. I mean, they really did get a divorce so that he could do this. And so those two people, and she says, "You're reluctant to ask her, aren't you?" And so she says, "Let's practice this. I'll be Leni. Ask me." And then she becomes Leni. And Leni gets convinced when she hears about the divorce, and she says, "Well, but we'd have to get it by Joseph Goebbels." And she says, let's practice. You be Goebbels." And so this guy plays Goebbels, and then ultimately he ends up playing Disney. So he plays those 3 roles. She plays those 2, plus an FBI interrogator. Mm-hmm. All 3 women are very different from each other, and the 3 men are very different from each other. So these fantastic actors with very little change in their physicality and costuming become these very different people. And what we get is people with this terrible problem that we like because they're super charming, this couple at the beginning. And then we come back to them, of course, and we find out what happened, what really happened to them during and after the war. And they're people that audiences are definitely going to sympathize with. It's a really moving part of the story because what happened was he lost touch with his wife when he was in the U.S. and he thought she was dead. And of course, what happened right after he and Lenny came to the U.S. was Kristallnacht. And so he didn't see his wife after that. So he didn't even go back to Germany, which was a huge rift between him and Leni Riefenstahl, too. So fantastic conflict. But I didn't want to write a play that was just about people doing bad stuff.
Sure.
And we get to see a lot of different aspects of both Lenny and Walt that makes them very dimensional, very interesting, and reveals some things that are true things about both of them, but doesn't let them off the hook either for the good and bad that they did.
How does that work when you're writing multiple characters played by two actors? How do you keep track of things? Or are you just writing it as if it were six and then just tweaking things?
Well, I want to be really aware of what makes it easy for the actors to be very different people with as little change as possible in the physicality. So there are two German characters with very different, for the guy, with very different physicality. Their voices are different, but they both have German accents. And one of them kind of easy. He's in a Nazi uniform, or he's wearing an armband, so that we know who that is. And then it's an amazing shock when that guy starts speaking as Walt Disney in American accents. Similarly, the Lottie, the wife, and Lenny both have German accents. And then when she plays the FBI interrogator and has a very American accent, it's amazing. So I often play with accents. I did this in Bauhaus as well. Like, this is how you're going to distinguish. In fact, they even talk about it. The students talk about, well, you're going to use this accent to help distinguish, and we're going to give you this this costume that fits your character to help distinguish who you're playing now, because you're playing multiple roles. So there's some really great instantaneous changes that happen in Crevasse. It's like so cleverly done. There's just boom, boom from one to the other, and it'll be shocking. And, we've made sure that the three women have very different hair, and that Anne can get in and out of the different hair quickly. It's really pretty fun.
So are you finding German actors that are German who can fake an American accent? Are you finding American actors who can pull off? Or are you doing dialect rehearsals? Oh,
well, we have some of that. But with Crevasse, they're both awesome with finding their own accents. I mean, they're such experienced actors. The other actors are younger. We have a dialect coach for them. And they also have a heavier lift. They've got, to try to distinguish between a German, a Swiss, and an Austrian accent. They're all speaking English with that accent, but of course we understand they're speaking German when they're speaking it. So, because it's sort of that thing when you see a movie with Nazis in it where they're speaking either with a German accent, speaking English with a German accent, or they're speaking English with an English accent, which kind of tells us, because it's happened so much, oh, they must be Nazis. So there's a lot of nuance to the dialect. Sometimes, and I've written some in, like the Swiss, one of the Swiss characters introduces himself by saying Grüezi, which is something that you don't say outside of Switzerland. I was just in Switzerland, and someone told me a Swiss-German joke, which is because Swiss-German sounds very different. Sort of, Germans think of it as more like a Southern accent, like we would think of a Southern accent in the United States. And the joke is, how do you say banana in Swiss German? And the answer is banana.
I take it they don't have that hard consonant at the end of Swiss.
Well, they do. It's very exaggerated, but it was very funny to see a Swiss person tell a joke on the way they speak German.
The Crevasse sounds, and I mean this in a very complimentary way, it feels simplistic when it comes to the set of what I'm imagining. Again, because you're jumping back and forth between these different areas. And so is it simple, or is it really?
There's some really clever stuff. So while they're in Germany, and they're in the home of the publicist and his wife, and then they're outside in Dr. Goebbels' office, and they're in Goebbels' office, and then they're on an ocean liner making the journey to New York. There's a scene or two in New York. That's all in a palette. The lighting, the costumes, the set, it's all white, gray, black, with a little dash of, Nazi armband red. But that's the palette. Then as soon as she walks into Disney's office, everything goes to color. It's sort of like the Wizard of Oz.
Sure.
And here we are in Southern California, and everything's like softer and more colorful. So there's that. And then there's a really fun thing. This is how I structured her visit. I based it on a Disney short film, about a 22-minute film from 1941 called The Reluctant Dragon. And at the end of it, there's a short cartoon about the Reluctant Dragon, which is a sweet little funny, although I would say slightly subversive children's story. But the rest of it, Disney knew that live action was a lot less expensive than animation. It's much easier to film people than it is to do all these drawings. Right. And in 1941, he had a brand new studio. And so the first 15 minutes of The Reluctant Dragon is a tour of the studio. It's fictionalized. There's the author Robert Benchley's come to try to persuade Walt to turn this book, The Reluctant Dragon, into an animated feature. And he gets the runaround while being taken on a tour of how we do animation. And that's how I structured Lenny's tour of the Disney studio. We get to see all these different rooms and what happens in the rooms. And then the 3 films that he was working on when she came to visit him were Pinocchio, which is all about moral choices, and Bambi. And she tells him how to do the most significant thing in Bambi. What's the one thing that you remember from Bambi?
Mom getting shot.
Yep. She tells him how to do it because they were actually struggling with how to do it. In reality, she didn't. But
sure.
But
no.
she tells him how to do it in terms of triumph of the will. She uses a technique, and he does it. And then he was working on Fantasia. And 2/3 of the music in Fantasia is German.
Is it Wagner? Is it Wagner?
No, there's no Wagner in it. Okay. There's no Wagner. No, there's Beethoven and Schubert. I forget who else, but it's a lot. 2/3 of it is German music. And so she recognizes that, and she actually suggests another song for him that he doesn't use. But to take this tour that is articulated in The Reluctant Dragon and then use those 3 movies as the examples that he shows works really, really well. And it walks you through probably what their day was like, because he spent the whole day with her.
So is the set itself, is it pretty bare minimum?
There are a number of doors, and some of them flip, and there's a backside to them and a front side, so you can do a little bit of stage magic, and there's some curtains and things. So it looks pretty minimal, but all kinds of magic happens with it.
Well, at least we found out what's going on with the cameras. It's the internal temperatures getting high. Let's do this one more time.
Okay.
And we are back for a third time.
See, it's a trilogy.
Yes, it's exactly. This whole episode is going to be but it's not as entertaining or as clever. So, okay, here we go. What does this look like on the page when it comes to when it comes to writing, the palette, the clever doors, is that part of the script? Is something that's written, or
I wrote the palette into it, and I always want to ask my collaborators to have fun doing their jobs. I never direct my own plays. I never want to design. I certainly am not an actor. All of those people, when they do their jobs, they're going to be more creative in doing those than I could write. Mm-hmm. So my stage directions are almost always quite minimal. I might say something in the stage directions that may even sound impossible to do, and maybe they don't do it, but often they find a creative way to do it, and to do it much better than I would have imagined it.
So do you just kind of suggest then, and just kind of, or do you say, or is it intricate instructions like, hey, this is what I'm imagining, feel free to run with this?
There not very many words on the page, but then in the normal process of putting together a play, the designers bring drawings and the director brings concepts, and you talk about all those things in the lead up to the play, and then that gives you the opportunity to let them work their magic, and as long as they're respecting my magic. And that has served me really well in most instances, because they're going to be better at that than me. And I love that, because theater, kind of harking back to themes of the Bauhaus, it's an entirely collaborative process. So the students collaborating to put on this presentation are actually, it's so meta, because they are actors collaborating to put on a play about students putting on this presentation. Right. They're living the experience.
Can we talk about disrespecting a playwright's magic?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is long ago. I mean, mostly I get to work with people that are very respectful of playwrights, because I have lived in Los Angeles a long time, and I really love and respect the theater community here and choose who I work with. So I don't have an issue with that. But one of the funniest things, when I was a very young playwright, I was doing a play, and the director made a big show of saying to me, "Oh, I black out all the stage directions when I get a play, because that's my job to do the stage directions." I'm like, okay. So then we're rehearsing the play, and this actor is doing a speech, and he stops and he says, "Well, I don't understand why I would say this in front of this other character. She's sitting right there, and I'm saying this in front of her." And the director turns to me with great accusation and says, "Yes, why is that?" And I said, "He's not saying it in front of her. She has left the stage. It's in the stage directions."
Similar story, and this is why. And again, apologies for those that are listening who have heard this story before. For the rest of the episode, just so everybody knows, we're having problems with my camera, so it's going to remain on Tom for the rest of this interview, because we've already stopped this 3 times. So there's a similar story with Daniel Guyton. He's a playwright who I think it was on our second or third, and he had a similar incident where the director did the same thing, and Daniel was kind of confused. And when the play was over, he's like, "What happened to the stabbing?" It's like, "Oh, well, we cut out all the stage direction suite." That seems like a very important, kind of along the lines of yours. Was there any disrespecting magic? Any other disrespecting magic stories that you experienced?
Well, there's the typical one, which you do run into fairly frequently, which is actors not learning their lines. That's always a challenge, or thinking that a paraphrase will do, and it won't do, because the line probably has a word in it, or 2 or 3, or a phrase that is echoed later, and is there for a very specific reason. So that's something that happens fairly frequently, but a good stage manager and a good director will remind the actors, "No, these are the lines, these are the lines." That's really crucial. But that's the most common way that, the worst way to disrespect a writer is to disrespect the lines. And actually, I'm not so wedded to the stage directions. I mean, yes, I'd like the person to leave when they're supposed to leave.
Sure.
or stab someone if they're supposed to stab someone. But I do think the stage directions are the territory of the director, because they might come up with something better, but they need to know what the playwright intended. But the lines, and this is where the Dramatists Guild, my union, protects me and all other playwrights, is the theater is not allowed to change the lines at all without the permission of the playwright. Now, through inattention, that the lines get changed if the actors aren't paying enough attention and the director and stage manager aren't paying enough attention. But if things are all going as they ought to go, there's actually a mechanism to make sure that the playwright's words are heard. Is there an area of playwriting that you find that playwrights spend too much focus? They're too worried about a particular aspect of playwriting, where it's like they really shouldn't worry about that. That's I think that they may worry about, dialogue is at the heart of it, so it's very natural to focus entirely on the dialogue without thinking enough of the structure. So I would say, while you have to pay attention to the dialogue, because that is the main thing, if you don't have a good structure, if you prioritize the dialogue well above the structure, then you might have a really terrible play. And I'll give you an example of that. A playwright, a well-known playwright, when I was a graduate student at UCLA, came to Los Angeles and because she had a show that was being done here. And it was her second or third show after one or two big hits. And she described her process, and she does an outline. And she said, I made this discovery, and so I just decided to go with that. And she described this very organic, but to me very frightening process for writing a play. And then I saw what she had done, and it was terrible. It got a big fancy production here in LA and died because she had focused on the feeling of the dialogue in the moment, which is so risky, and she hadn't really structured it. And so,
what do we call that, lazy playwriting? Just circling back.
Yeah. The other thing, there's one other thing that I think playwrights, and, we're in Los Angeles, so a lot of actors write plays, which, I was an actor slightly years ago, which led me to playwriting. But one of the funniest things that happens is actors writing solo shows for themselves to perform about their own lives. And, if you're Chaz Parliamentary, good on you. Because, A Bronx Tale was that. It was amazing, and it launched his whole career as an actor and as a playwright. But usually people are not that excited about seeing a solo show about an actor's life, especially if the actor is not already a really, really interesting person. So that's one thing I would caution. And the problem, of course, with a solo show is, what's the conflict? So one of the things I like to do is take a problem like that and figure out, how do you fix it? So I did a solo show that was designed to fix it. Who's the antagonist in a solo show? And this was my play, Captain of the Bible Quiz Team, and we made the audience the antagonist, and it worked like gangbusters.
Sure.
And the audience was super uncomfortable being the antagonist, but then they also get to kind of redeem themselves in the course of the play. So it worked really, really well. But I think there are a lot of, we just had the Fringe Festival, and there's a lot of self-production and performance of things you've written for yourself, which
right.
I do applaud actors doing that, just maybe not write about your own life.
Yeah, and we've touched on this in the past, in past episodes about one-man shows, and it's usually just a review of something tragic that happened in their lives and how they've overcome it.
I would say if you're lucky, because often it's not that, it's just, here's my life and you should appreciate me. Sometimes it is. If something terrible happened and they can articulate it, that's fantastic. But they have to find the right way to articulate it.
Is that what got you into playwriting? Realizing that if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to dabble in this, I should really go and get some experience in it, or get some kind
no. I mean, the reason it's very funny, it's almost the flip side of that. I realized college is really valuable because it teaches you not only what you can do, but what you can't. And I went to Northwestern where I was surrounded by good actors, and I learned I'm not an actor. But I also have been writing things, and I did write a one-act play for my friends to perform when I was at Northwestern. It won an award, and that made me realize, I'm better at that. And it was super fun to do. So that's how I started in playwriting, and then I got an MFA at UCLA where I got the exact kind of instruction that I needed.
How much did you grow as a playwright from going into an MFA?
Significantly.
And what was it? What do you think it was? Or what?
Well, I had a strong background in a really good broad undergraduate education and an understanding of theater from Northwestern. I did not get a lot of practical experience because I wasn't cast in very many things at Northwestern. But at UCLA, the program was structured for experience. And the thing that was best about that was you had the opportunity to get a lot of productions at UCLA. Okay. I don't know how the program works today, and then there were always these one-acts that were done. There were student-written one-acts done every quarter. And so I had 3 of my one-acts done, and then other people in the other MFA programs, in the puppetry program, in the directing program, they wanted to direct plays of mine. And one of them, the puppetry person, commissioned me to write a play for her to do as her thesis. And then one professor and one directing MFA directed plays of mine. So I had 6 plays performed in the 2 years that I was there. And that's where you really learn, because you're doing the work.
I want to go back to Northwestern for 1 second, because Northwestern sounds like a place where you need to audition to get in.
It's not a conservatory.
Okay.
And
was it a BFA program, or was it just okay?
No,
it was just a basic.
I don't even know if they had BFA programs back then. This was a long time ago.
Okay.
No, I think I got into Northwestern. I had good grades, but I think they also had a geographic mandate to try to get kids from all over the country, and I was from Oklahoma. And it's like, that sounds pretty depressed and underprivileged. Let's let him in. So, and it was a huge culture shock.
What was it that made you want to go into? Did you just go into theater with maybe a focus in acting and just want to give it a shot, or did you go and I'm going to go to Northwestern and I'm going to study acting?
It was very funny. It was all sort of accidental. My dad taught theater.
Okay.
And so no money was saved for college. I would go to his school where he was teaching because children of faculty go free.
Got it.
But I applied to Northwestern. I don't even know why, and for early admission, and I got in. I didn't apply anywhere else because I got a notification early, and it was expensive, but much less expensive than today. And my parents weren't ready for that, but everybody pitched in, and I got to go there. And I'm so deeply grateful for what I learned at both schools.
Sure.
I almost learned the opposite thing at each place. Great academic education at Northwestern. So smart. And as one of the professors said, you're not paying for the quality of the instruction, you're paying for the quality of your competition at Northwestern. And, my competition in acting was way better than I was. So that was incredibly valuable. And then I had this great experience of actually doing theater at UCLA.
Did that same rule apply, that the competition aspect from enacting? Does it still apply in playwriting now as well, or no?
Well, I mean, you're always competing, and playwrights. There are way too many people wanting to write plays and writing plays that it's not easy to get a play produced. You have to really work hard to make it happen.
Which leads me to the next question I was going to ask: is that how does one get 100 productions all over the world?
I actually used to teach a course at UCLA Extension it was originally called By Hook or By Crook, How to Get Your Play Produced. And it's sort of like everything else in life, it's relationships. So say yes a lot, meet a lot of people. When you do have an opportunity to work with somebody, be a good collaborator and make a friendship that can continue. I tell people in college, keep your friendships from college. And I use Tim Robbins as an example. He was an undergraduate when I was a graduate student, and he took with him so many of his fellow students to Actors Gang, and then they also appear in his movies. And so if you find really good collaborators early on, just keep them, keep going with them. And there's so many people from UCLA that I work with maybe peripherally, but I go see all their work. And some of those are lifelong collaborations.
This sounds like I'm projecting something that's I'm not. Is that by design genuine support, or this is by hook or by crook, genuine support or obligatory?
So here's the thing. When you do something enough and you get really good at it, even if you start off not being good at it, it becomes a pleasure. So for 30 years, I was a fundraiser. A lot of people are like, that's a horrible job. I would never want to do that. How can you ask people for money? Well, if you do it enough, you find the fun in it, and it becomes pretty easy. Similarly, I'm kind of a shy person, or I used to be a shy person. On the Myers-Briggs test, I was barely on the extrovert side. But in my job, when I worked at the LA County Museum of Art raising money, I had to really be an extrovert. And so I kind of permanently moved way over to the extreme of extroversion. So the nature of theater is collaborative. You have to work with the director and actors and designers. And if you find the joy in that, and, being with talented people who can make your work better is always a joy.
Sure.
So, and then you continue those friendships and, are always having lunch or having dinner or taking someone to a play. That's what's wonderful about life, especially when you can meld your work, your theater work with your social life and your fun. And so I love doing that. I mean, and I'm not always perfect at it. Nobody markets themselves well enough. I mean, there's some people that maybe they market themselves too well, beyond what their work deserves. But, God bless them for their perseverance and their talent at marketing. But if you can strike a balance between doing really good work and doing pretty good marketing, self-promotion, that's sort of the sweet spot.
No, and that's what I appreciate. And that's some wonderful advice. And I hope that listeners take the value of that away from this episode, or at least this part, because I think that more often than not, because again, you've been in LA for a long time, and sometimes more often than not, the people that are coming to see your play are, actors or the friends and family of the actors that are in your play. And then, luckily, if you go see somebody else's play, luckily you'll get them to come see yours. And sometimes more often than not, that's not the case, and they don't return the favor.
Yeah. And then that tells you about who they are.
And that's why I hope that they'll kind of change their tune and start doing it from the,
I mean, it's enlightened self-interest, but it's also the pleasure. I mean, these friendships with people that I've collaborated with over the years, it's what's the most fun.
Yeah.
Is just getting together to talk about theater or gossip about theater or say, did you see this horrible production?
It happens.
And you can then go from there to, but did you see this? Wasn't that amazing? Or, we often say to each other, what have you seen lately? Anything good? And then you'll say, you have to see this. And we know each other, if people have worked together, this will be perfect for you. You would love to see this. Or there's something about this that I'm not sure of. Would you go see it and tell me what you think? And, we do that a lot. I think this is an amazing theater community, and I don't have to tell you, but we have more actors than anywhere in the world, and we have more theaters than anywhere in the world. And that means that we have more creativity focused on new work than anywhere else. And it's a secret that only we here in Southern California know, but there's so much new work being produced all the time here. And I have a very grand scheme that I've talked about with some of the larger theaters to create more collaboration between the large LORT theaters in LA and the thing that's unique to LA, which is all of these 99-seat theaters. There is a way to make much more of this amazing landscape that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you working on anything new?
Always. I'm right now in a workshop process at Moving Arts Theater.
Oh, yes, with oh my God, what
Darren Anthony?
No, my gosh, I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on his name. Anyway,
so
I'm embarrassed now that I forgot his name. I was going to say Roy, and it's not. Anyways, my God,
call me in the middle of the night.
Yes, that's what's going to happen.
But anyway, I'm in their Mad Lab, and there are 5 playwrights, and it's a really great process. And so the next thing that's going to happen with the play that I've already written, and all 5 of us have already written plays and had readings, 2 readings of each play. And now I'll be going into a workshop process with the director, Michael Matthews, and I've always wanted to work with him. So I'm really, really excited. And we're workshopping a play called The Bachelor's Club. I'm from Oklahoma, and one of the things that we think about here in terms of the gay community, LGBTQ plus community here in LA, we're always feeling like, oh, there's so much focus on New York and so much focus on Stonewall, when in fact a lot of gay politics started here with Mattachine Society and Cooper's Donuts and the Black Cat happening all before Stonewall. So we're always thinking, oh, there's that. But then, of course, there's the coasts, LA and San Francisco and New York. And what about the middle of the country? And so I wanted to write a play. Do you know Thornton Wilder's one act called The Long Christmas Dinner? It's a Christmas dinner. He wrote it in 1931. That the play takes place over 90 years, but it's only 40 minutes. And all these family members come to Christmas dinner, and they grow older, and they have children, and they die.
Wow.
And it is so beautiful. It's really, really nice. And I thought, I want to do that in a gay bar, because the world within and without a gay bar over decades has changed a great deal.
Sure.
So I thought, okay, well, I used to go to gay bars in LA and San Francisco and New York and Chicago and New Orleans. But those are the places where you kind of expect a gay bar. And I came out in Oklahoma, where people just don't expect that there are gay bars. But when I came out in 1978, there were a dozen gay bars in Oklahoma City. And it was a pretty big community. I mean, it's the buckle of the Bible Belt, so it's pretty unexpected. But I wanted people to think about the rest of the country, the whole middle that gets dismissed by those of us on the coast sometimes. And so I started researching the history of the LGBTQ community in Oklahoma City. And I knew that there had been gay bars, at least one gay bar, since 1960-something. But of course, it goes back much further. There have been gay bars, a lot of gay bars in Oklahoma City since the 1940s, which was a revelation to me. And then I discovered that the mayor of Oklahoma City from 1964 to 1967 was gay but closeted. And at first I couldn't believe it, but I've done a lot of research, and he kept a diary, and I now have a copy of that whole diary from 1934 to 1976. And he was very careful in the diary, but it's very easy to read between the lines. When a young man shows up in the diary and gets praised a lot and shows up in the diary every day for 6 months and then disappears and there's another one, and he's not dating women at all, it's really, really clear. And so I went back to Oklahoma City and read the diary there and now have gotten it reproduced. But I also did some other really fun research. There's a area in Oklahoma City which is mostly gay bars, and every night I went to a different gay bar, and I did something that's so counterintuitive in the gay bar. I tried to find the oldest guy in every bar because, he'll have the history. The sad fact was I was always the oldest guy in all of these places. And when I wasn't chronologically the oldest, I was the person who had been gay the longest or out the longest. So I knew things about Oklahoma City gay history that other people didn't know. But some people said, talk to so-and-so, talk to so-and-so. So they led me to these other people. And I got a lot of really interesting information. And then that mayor had a cabin outside of the town. And so I found the address of it, and I went out there and found the people that owned it, and they talked to me about the mayor. And it was hilarious. Here we are in the middle of the country, and the guy who owned the cabin and the house that the mayor built next to it. And he said, well, when I first bought this, the mayor always used this house for parties. There was a pool, and he said, and I did too. And he said, but I'm not going to talk about that. So I kind of let that go for a while. And then later I said to him, so you didn't want to talk about the mayor's parties. Were they wild? Just trying to leave it really open. And then he did this very funny thing. He said, well, and he looked both ways and then said, some say the mayor went both ways. And so that was a nice confirmation. I've since got more concrete confirmation because I didn't want to write this, produce this play, just assuming, because, there's a tendency in the gay community to sort of make someone gay, make them gay, because that we're trying to reclaim history that's lost, and sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's not. So I didn't want to be inaccurate, but it turns out it's all true. So he's part of this story, but this is a very complicated story because part of it takes place today and has that whole coastal thing versus Oklahoma. Then part of it's in the 60s when he was mayor. And his best friend, one of his best friends and collaborators, was the foremost Native American historian in the United States in the middle of the 20th century. Her name was Muriel Wright. She was Choctaw. And so there's also, and she grew up in what became Oklahoma, and she was born there before it was a state. And so there's a section that takes place in 1905 to 1906. So it's 3 different time periods. But as I often do, it's the 3 people from today who play all of those people. Nice. And it's complicated, but it's really, really cool.
That's awesome.
And it's important for me that the people from the coasts respect the LGBTQ history of the rest of the country, and that we, this is obviously a huge problem for us right now, is that we feel divided, and sometimes it's the coasts against the middle. So I'm doing what I can to say the middle isn't always what you think.
Sure. Where can people find your work?
I have a website, tomjacobsonplaywright.com, and my work is, the ones that have been produced have been published by Broadway Play Publishing Inc. So those are 2 places that they can find it. And then you can always contact me through the website too.
Awesome. And then are you on the socials?
I'm on Facebook, and I'm promoting the 2 plays that are upcoming on Facebook. I also have another play that will open around the holidays called Mrs. Christmas. Okay. And that'll be here in LA and probably in Long Beach. Great. So I'll be promoting that one too. But, I'm old, so I use Facebook.
Don't we all? Well, not so much.
No, we
anymore,
don't,
no.
because you know what? I'm doing this webinar next week at Art Center. And of course, their constituents are mostly students. And I said, so are you promoting this on Facebook? And they said, oh no, we gave up Facebook years ago. We only use Instagram.
Oh, at least they're using Instagram. I thought for sure it was going to be TikTok.
Well, I think they do TikTok too, but definitely not Facebook, which cracks me up.
Fair enough. Well, Tom Jacobson, thanks for coming on this episode of Playwright Spotlight.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.